And so, yeah, I guess out of that gratitude and the awareness that we're kind of in this together, I thought I'd start out with, okay, it's a bit of an old, it's a bit of an old video, but this gives you a picture of what we're trying to do. Here we go.
Some people like to climb mountains. I like to build planes in the air.
I grew up wanting to be on a wing, wanting to be up this high.
Sometimes the temperature up at altitude will reach 60 below. It's brisk, it's refreshing.
You never know what you're going to come across up here. Canadian geese, mallards,
Owls.
These people back here, that's why I come to work. That's why I build airplanes in the sky.
We're not just building a plane here. We're building a dream.
I love this job.
I get a lot of thanks up here. When I look over there and I see that little kid, the look in his eyes, that's all the thanks I need.
EDS, managing the complexities of the digital economy.
Some people like to.
So that's I think a bit of a picture of what we're doing here today. There's certainly lots of preparation and thought that's gone into what could this look like. But your participation, in this training, but also being willing to be, I don't know, I guess a bit of guinea pigs to what this is going to work like in various churches, because that will just help us to learn and to grow, to do it better and to do it more effectively in the future. So thank you abundantly. So Al, I don't know, do I just share this my screen? Or
Yeah, so maybe John, what might be easiest right now is if you go down by the participants button, there should be like a security button.
Yeah, no, I can give you. You wanted me to give you the host?
No, just make it available for screen sharing.
Oh, okay. I've never done the security. Okay, security button.
One option should be allow participants to share their screen.
Got it. Awesome. Yeah.
All right, perfect. All right, are you looking at it?
I am. You might have to shrink it down a bit, but I don't know.
That would probably be on your end. I just have it shared.
Okay.
Can everyone else see the screen?
Yep.
Okay, perfect. And just so you all know, all the material that we're going to share with you today is going to come to you in an email afterwards. Right? John, I wonder if maybe I'll introduce myself for a second.
Sure.
Yeah.
Well, I was going to throw that out there. Do we want to introduce each other first as well? I neglected to do that. Say what churches we're from and who we are, I guess. You want to do that, and you want to start us out?
Sure. I'll stop my screen share for a sec then.
Okay.
I'm Al Postma. I work for Pastor Church Resources in the CRC, and my specific role is around classis renewal. So I'm, the guy who pays attention to the health and functioning of classes across Canada and the US. And really, the driving force behind my work is really for churches and pastors and church leaders to be able to say that they're better off because they're part of their classes. Church visiting is a way that happens. When it's done well, churches really can feel like they're better off because of it. So it's just been a privilege to work with John and Moses and Leslie to bring us to this point to see what's possible. So I'm really grateful to be part of this.
So I guess I'll just introduce myself too. John Bowers. I'm a church planter in Milton, but also the missions catalyzer for Classis Toronto. So Leslie, Moses.
I think I know almost everyone on this call. My name is Leslie. I work for Faith Formation ministries in the Christian Reformed Church, and this is my region. And I'm very glad to be able to support John in his catalyzer role, but also Al in his classes support role, because I think what we're doing here is an important experiment that could bless other classes. So I'm wearing multiple hats, but I will be one of the regional church visitors in order to kind of see how this takes root in classes and hopefully be able to feed back information to Al.
All right, Moses.
I guess I'll go next. My name is Moses. I'm the pastor at First CRC in Barrie. And yeah, just happy to continue the ministry of looking at how we can all be healthy churches together. And yeah, looking forward to today's conversation.
All right, I'll rhyme you off. Dan, could you introduce yourself?
Yes, my name is Daniel Dawson. I am a member of Crosspoint Church in Brampton, and I'm going on to my 7th year in the church there.
Thank you. Thanks, Dan. Mike?
Good morning. I'm Mike Lochner. I'm my wife grew up in Georgetown. I moved into Georgetown 18 years ago, so I'm still an outsider, but we've been attending Georgetown for quite some time. And yeah, I was asked to do this, and I like people, so this will be a nice fit, and I'm interested in seeing how other churches are doing.
Awesome, Mike. Thank you. John DeWinter.
Good morning, all. I'm a member of First Church also in Barrie, along with Moses. And Moses was the guy that asked me to think about being part of this process. I have been way back a pastor, and for most of my career, just a faithful church member and often in council. Currently, my wife is chair of council in Barrie, so I'm the right-hand guy now.
Nice. Elaine?
Good morning, everyone. My name's Elaine Millar, and I am on staff at Clearview Church in Oakville. And so we have a new pastor, Phil Reinders, and he asked if I would be willing to consider being a part of this church reboot. And so I'm delighted to be here and learn more about my role is discipleship. And so, of course, I have a bit of a discipleship hat on and would just love to, yeah, keep leaning in and learning from one another. So glad to be here.
Awesome. That's cool. John Maibu.
Yeah, hi, I'm John Maibu, who has been a member of Willowdale CRC for about almost 30 years. And I'm glad to be here.
All right. Rich Grift.
Yeah, serving as pastor at Crosspoint, and interested in learning from you and maybe having some kind of hand to help each other in our church house.
Thanks, Rich. Eric Groot-Niblink. You're on mute, Eric.
I'm new to Classes Toronto, middle of November. I started as a pastor / chaplain at Holland Christian Homes or Heritage Fellowship CRC. And yeah, over the years, been a church visitor several different times, but yeah, there always seemed something inadequate about what we were doing. And yeah, it just kind of felt like a kind of a drop in and then out again, and no real continuity in terms of ways that you might help a church.
Cool. Thanks, Eric. That's good insight. And Winston, who's kind of leaning his ear in from another classes. You want to introduce yourself?
Yeah, I'm Winston Visser. I'm from Classes Eastern Canada. I'm a local mission leader on behalf of the classis and for Resonate, sort of what John does in Classis Toronto. I'm curious about the process, having been a pastor at one point, having been a deacon at one point, having done a number of church visits over the years. And even when I was doing them, I was tweaking them to be a little bit more helpful and intentional and less formulaic. When I was doing them, a lot of times I would send a number of questions ahead of time for the council and maybe the congregation to wonder about, so that when we came actually and visited, we had a template to work off of and say, okay, how are these things going? So I was already then trying to think, how can we do these things a little differently? And I know in Classis Eastern Canada, there seems to be fairly still faithful church visiting going on, but it still follows maybe the traditional model. So I'm just wondering, how Classis Toronto is experiencing us trying to shift to a different model and just try to see maybe how that might be a possibility as well in our classes. So
Thanks, Winston.
You're welcome.
Yeah, I mean, I think as we're sort of sharing our churches and even a bit of our heart, it's encouraging because clearly there is going to be, we're all going to be learning here. So this is, I'm excited for where this might go. And yeah, anyways, Al, do you want to throw the slides on there and I'll do a bit of an intro? In some ways we covered a lot of this stuff already, but.
Yep. This is just the intro of what we're going to be accomplishing today. John's going to talk a little bit about the vision. Just so you know, between John and Leslie and Moses and I, especially, like everything that we're talking about today has been a full group effort. So irrespective of who's speaking at any given time, we've gone through this all together. So we're just going to look at vision, why this, just kind of make sure we're all on the same page about it. And then we're going to look at some groundwork, preparation for the visit itself, and sort of post-visit moving forward. And what this morning is really designed around is giving you the practical tools and ability to know what the task at hand is, and what resources are available for you. So the goal is to get our hands dirty a little bit in it.
Yeah, I would just throw out there that, hey, if a question or a bit of confusion pops in your mind, feel free to just, drop it in the chat, or, I mean, you can always unmute as well. It's a pretty small group. Yeah, we want this to be a live, lived into experience because, yeah, it shouldn't just be you observing and leaving with a whole bunch of questions you wish you would ask. So, all right, let's go. Yeah, so the next slide, Al. As I mentioned earlier, church visiting has been a part of who we are for a long time. It's certainly in the current church order. It was in back in 1618, 1920, was part of the Synod of Dort. Actually, very interesting. Same article number, I think, for church visiting way back then. And just some interesting ideas they had of how to grow a region spiritually. So anyways, we'll leave that for another time. But certainly that was always what was happening when we were, in the New Testament, and what we see in the letters of Paul and all through the New Testament. But the reality is, certainly in Classis Toronto, different than Classis Eastern Canada from the sound of things, is that it's been in a decline. It virtually has not been happening in I don't know how long, for some years, I think, between the churches. But as was mentioned by Brother Eric there, often church visiting, depends who's doing it. I've had great church visits as a established church pastor, but often they'd be mechanical, superficial, like, are you keeping good minutes? Those kind of checklist questions. Often it would end up feeling a little bit impersonal because it was kind of a checklist thing, and very temporary in that we don't know, we might not have a church visit for another 3 years when one is off council, and that sense of continuity and moving this conversation forward was mostly not there, I would say. And of course, the other time church visits did happen is when something negative happens in the local church. Maybe there's a conflict with council or with the pastor, and then the visitors come. So for all these reasons, church visiting was not so exciting. But the hope was, in the next slide, is that what if we did something different? What if we figured out a way to go a little bit deeper, to look at the substantial questions, to build a longer term relationship, not just a one-off sort of visit, but also, how can we be more proactive instead of reactive to problems? And that's really what we're trying to do with church visiting. So why are we doing it now? Why is this a good time to do that? Beyond the fact that we haven't really been doing it in a while, is I think we really need some encouragement as leaders, as councils. This has been a long 2 years of going through COVID, so many changes and decisions we've had to make where there's no right answers, being forced to make these decisions. And it just feels like, I think for some of us that, things are slipping, but also we can get a little bit discouraged. But part of it is, how can we create sort of fresh eyes to older churches? And you don't even have to be that old. I'm certainly, us as a church plant, there's lots of good habits we do, but there's also bad habits that we slide into. And having different eyes come in and sort of, take a step back, but also look deeper at the same time can be really beneficial for long-term for churches. And of course, how do we stand together? Again, if I think back to our introduction, I just find that just so encouraging. We're kind of personing this movement, but there's so much wisdom and insight in you, but also in our churches that are just excited to be able to share that together. So how is it going to work? How is this going to work as a process? Well, first of all, it's going to take more time. When you just do checklists every few years, that's, you can get through the churches pretty quickly. If you want to go deeper, there's more of a process. And so there's going to be a bit more work. It's going to require participation. We have sort of three, and I think Al will explain it in a moment, three sort of regional church visitors, but the church contact persons and their kind of dual role is really critical into making this effort work, because there's more work to go deeper. And so we're really thankful to have a tool to be able to do that, and that's the Healthy Church Executive Survey. So really, in summary, if I could say that this is just the beginning, but it is something so foundational to what the church is called to be and to do from the beginning. As Elaine mentioned, her role is discipleship, but we are also called to kind of disciple each other, not just person to person, but church to church. So your openness, I just think, how do you make space for grace? And this just seems like one of those efforts. So thank you so much again for coming. Al, back to you.
All right. Again, we're going to start getting some slides that have a decent amount of material on them. Just want to remind you again, all of this will be emailed to you immediately following. Okay. So you can jot any notes you want, but you'll get this. And we'll send it both as a slides. This is Google Slides. We'll send it as a slides and a PDF. Okay. Who is involved? The structure of this is designed around basically two groups of people, or two types of people. One is a local contact person. And I know that most of you are familiar with this. I mean, you're here, right? So hopefully you're a little bit familiar with this structure, what's being asked, but we want to make sure we're all on the same page. Local contact person is one person from each church. And the role of the local contact person within their own church is to shepherd the survey and scheduling the church visit, helping your own church. So for each of you, helping your own church be receivers of this church visiting. Okay. And then the church visiting team is both a regional church visitor. John mentioned there are three, for one main person for each region, as well as 2 of the local contact people. So it's designed that you both receive and you give. Okay? And then we just have this note because we've heard from I think at least one person, maybe a couple more, that someone might be willing and able to serve as the local contact person on a receiving end, but isn't necessarily able to serve on the going out end. So ideally it's the same person, but if that's you and there's someone else and you want to split the task, that's completely fine as well. So John mentioned that this is using Healthy Church. You all got the email leading up to this. Maybe the report made sense. Maybe it didn't make sense at all. We'll have a look at it together. And this is the Healthy Church really looks at 11 different health indicators. And if any of you have done anything with, individual personality assessments or organizational assessments, that, there are many ways that you can slice and dice and ask questions to get at health. So we know that Healthy Church is not the only way of accessing this sort of self-awareness for a congregation, but it seems to be a really helpful one and a really healthy one. So you can see what these 11 are, and we have them grouped into 3. You can see health in an upward life, so centrality of God's words, authentic spirituality, transforming worship, health in the inward life, and you can see those, and then health in the outward life. And the executive survey is designed to help give a sense of how the church is doing in each one of these areas and how the individual is seeing themselves in each one of these areas, right? So just a couple features of Healthy Church. The survey does ask questions about both the individual participant and their impressions of their church. And the beauty of that is, you can get a sense of how people see the whole community, but then it also provides an aggregate score of the whole community as they think of themselves. So if someone says, prayer is really important to our church, and if that, ranks high, for example, and then within it, every person who answers says prayer is not a central part of my life, that also tells you about the individuals, but it also tells you about the church. And how do those 2 fit together? If in aggregate, the individuals all say one thing, but then they also say something different about their church as a community. So it helps kind of suss out, how the church functions. It's designed to engage with the whole church community. What we're looking at is the executive survey, but there is actually a larger survey behind it as well, okay? Just so you know. So the survey we're looking at is actually it's pretty quick. It doesn't go super deep, but there is a larger survey behind it. And whether it is the executive survey that's smaller or the larger survey, it's designed to get the whole community. So some surveys will just ask the leadership, the council or whoever. This is just, here's the link. Anyone and everyone within the church can fill it out, and it pulls that all together. The survey has been vetted by and operates through an independent and respected survey organization. You may not know this, but the Kelvin Center for Social Research that runs out of Kelvin University is actually, they contract out to a lot of different organizations. So they're a very reputable organization, and the survey is done sociologically sound. Okay, so it's a solid survey. It's definitely not one that you click on Facebook to find out, which type of penguin you are. I haven't actually seen a survey that asked me that, but anyway, you get the point. And it offers valuable and accurate self-awareness. So if we get into some of the groundwork materials, and again,
Al, can I just interrupt for a second?
Yes, please. I was just going to say, if any of you want to interrupt, please do. So
maybe
go
just
ahead,
go
John.
back that slide and just see if there's any questions about clarification or, yeah, just good to get some response. You guys tracking?
Maybe I would speak up a moment because I just, I did look that survey over, the executive survey, Al, and I don't know all of you know about what's happening at Willowdale, but we are a very different church than a standard CRC church now. In the last 3 years, we have over 100, really closer to 150 new members from one culture, all refugees, all converts from Islam. And we are, and when I read the questions over, it struck me that for many of the people in our church, those questions are not going to speak, they're not going to understand the question necessarily or fully even translated, I would say. It's more the concepts. So I've been wondering, what should I say about this? But I do think that it's a good thing. And maybe the bigger survey would have some, I don't really know, but I think we would need to think about something different with Willowdale, is all I'm saying. And I don't really know what that would be.
Sure. Yeah, and maybe that's something that we could talk about. Like, I know that, so California South is also a classis that has a lot of, diversity, ethnic diversity, language diversity. And they have moved forward with using Healthy Church as well. So they're doing it, it's not the same, but they're doing a similar thing. And they've actually partnered with us to do some translation work, to offer it in more than just English, so Spanish, Korean, and I think maybe Mandarin. I'm not sure. I can't remember. So it would be interesting, though, to maybe talk to some of them, and I can reach out to our people just to see how it's tracking, not just in terms of translation, but in terms of the survey and the content within a multicultural setting.
I'd be happy to, I showed our Farsi language translator and ministry leader the survey, and she said the same thing I'm saying. But I think, it would be something that we could work with you on for our church, creating something that might be more relevant. But yeah, it's finding time to do it is going to be part of the problem. But anyways.
Yeah, for sure.
That's a great question. That's kind of stuff we am excited that we have that complication, for sure.
Yes, for sure.
Any other questions?
Yeah, well, I just I liked the executive survey, having once been through the larger survey, and A, sometimes people don't have patience for that, and B, they almost get lost in the kind of the full set of questions. So I'm guessing the executive survey would generally be more appealing, but I don't know.
Yeah, it's something we found that the executive survey is more accessible, just in terms of time commitment as well.
Yeah.
So if a church, what we've started doing with some of the Healthy Church material is trying to make space for engaging with the executive material. But if a church were to say, we really like this, we really find it helpful, we want to go deeper.
Sure. Yeah.
Then it actually, Healthy Church has that expanded possibility.
Yeah.
But at the very least, it gives a shared framework of conversation. So yeah, and that's, I kind of wonder, John, back to your question, we won't hang around here too long, but one of the values of everyone doing a similar, 11 indicators is you can have the same conversations among churches. And so I just wonder what might be possible, and we can, again, think about this externally, but what might be possible that allows it to be adapted for your situation, but also allows the conversation to be part of the larger conversation within classes effectively. So
I understand. Yeah, thanks.
Yeah, cool.
Great questions.
Yeah.
I know when I was in engineering that the stats course was the worst mark in my whole degree. My eyes would glaze over, but we'll get into it practically too. So we'll have some practice to look at what some of the results look like.
All right, you guys can pause or ask me to go back to a slide at any point, okay? So we're gonna start talking about the survey groundwork. This is the preparation. This is sort of like the back end administration of it, okay? So the survey groundwork within your local church, your own church, we have who is primarily responsible. It is the local contact. So it's you for your own church in this case. And what happens is you'll be given a custom link for the Kelvin Center for Social Research. It will be just for your church. You can, I put in here, get the survey into the participants' hands. You could send it out by email if you have emails for your church. You could put it on the church website or bulletin. I think in some cases when surveys like this have been done, and this kind of depends on being in person, but sometimes a church might have, a device, especially for people if they don't have internet access. If someone brings an iPad or something like that to the church and helps someone just fill out the survey as part of their time at the worship service. For that matter, I think it's a pretty straightforward process. If you wanted to get some people who don't have internet or don't have the capacity, someone could make a visit to them from the church and just pull out their phone and have them fill out the survey, while you sit down and enjoy a coffee or something like that. So there's all sorts of opportunities to engage with the survey. This is just a question that you might want to think is who should get the link? Who is participating? There is some freedom. Again, what you do as a local contact person will inform the way that your church receives it. We don't want to create an expectation that it's a one size fits all. So you could say, we just want our church leadership, the council or whatever, to do the executive survey. We won't tell you that you may or may not do that. You could say, we want it in the hands of absolutely everyone in the church. So whatever's going to serve your church best in order to receive a church visit, that's something that you can have a conversation about. So, but just being clear, who should get the link, and then moving forward from there. There's a question about how long to give people to fill out. This is just a very practical question. We find that it often helps to give a very defined timeline and tell people right up front. So you could say, for example, March is church visitor survey month, and we're encouraging everyone in the church or whoever's been asked to participate to fill it out during the month of March. And people need to be told multiple times or so on. But at least there's sort of like a contained expectation. And then it also allows you to move forward after that time, regardless of who has or has not participated by then. And this is just a tip. There's conversations people have about survey fatigue. And some of the stuff that's come out about survey fatigue is it's not actually that people have survey fatigue. They have survey results fatigue, which is if you're asked to fill out a survey and again, and you have no idea what it's actually going to be used for, people just start checking out. So people don't like to yell into the void. So if you tell people what the expectation is after the survey, that actually can really help for them to feel compelled to participate. So if you tell people what the process is, hey, we're asking everyone in the church to fill this out during March. After March, it's going to go to this group of people from our classes who are going to look at it and pray over it and wonder about, what might be bubbling up in our church. And they're going to come back and have us, with the council or the congregation or whoever, this is what's going to happen with it. People are like, oh, okay, I can put my voice into that process. So, any questions, comments, disagreements, amens, whatever you've got on survey groundwork? All right. So we're going to shift gears now. You've prepared, you've got the link, you've sent the survey out. People have done the survey. Now we're talking about getting ready for the visit. So this is after the survey is closed, it's done. but before the visit itself happens. How do you get ready for the visit? So the regional church visitor is the primary person who's responsible, and the team. Okay, so the team would be the two other local contact people and the regional church visitor. And what you're going to do is you're going to get the results, and we'll have the sample survey in a little bit. But well, you've seen the sample survey. We've emailed it to you. But you're going to get the survey results and review it, pray through it. We really encourage it. This is not just like a statistics 101 class. This is a what's the Spirit doing in this congregation as I'm going to go visit with them. As a group, you're going to form some questions, and we just encourage cultivating your own curiosity as you read through the survey. You might know other things about that church as well, but what do you notice? What are you getting nudged toward? Where does your curiosity develop? And within questions, you want to cultivate curiosity within the church group itself. So one of the things we like to say with stuff like Healthy Church, or in Pastor Church Resources, we do Berkman assessments with pastors and so on. We really want to have people start to engage in conversations with themselves, and the survey allows that. So how do you create questions and help spark curiosity that people within the church say, I didn't even know that about ourselves, so that's the sort of thing we're looking at in forming questions. And then just, again, some practical pieces on setting up the meeting. One of the things I've noticed in church visiting, but also other, we do stuff with regional pastors, within classes settings, but also in church settings. I'm actually an elder at our church now as well. So making visits, setting up connection points with people. There's a lot of power in just getting something on the calendar. We often wait. We often, don't get it set up. Just getting something on the calendar makes a massive difference. And so that could be at a council meeting or whatever it is, but that's a local contact person will help you do that. And you're going to have to figure out with the local contact person who's invited. Is this with the council? Is this, is the whole congregation getting together and hearing these results and having a conversation? How will that shape what the visit looks like? All those different pieces are things that you're going to want to sort out based on your church situation. I'm going to pause for a second. Comments, questions?
Just a bit of an amen to Al's comment about getting it on the calendar. I mean, the church visiting reboot was kind of a general idea and a sense of where it might go in October. And Al and the three of us, we met, and then just January 29th just seemed close enough that we'd get something rolling, but seems so far away. But now here we sit, because we set a date. And in some respects, that'll be a key part of the contact person's work, is to say, this is the month that we're going to do the surveys, and here's the date that the team could come and visit. That'll be just invaluable, so make it less overwhelming, help you to break things down.
Again, this will be coming to you, but here's just a couple sample questions, just for your consideration. Like, what do our highest health areas tell us about the kinds of ministry we're naturally drawn to? What do our lowest health areas tell us about what kinds of ministry we naturally avoid? If we had the energy and resources to focus only one improving focus, if we had the energy and resources to only focus on one, improving one health area, which one would it be and why? And what choices have we made, or do we make, that keep our strengths strong or our weaknesses weak? So again, interacting with the results themselves. So everything's been prepared, the date's been set, the survey's gone out, all this is in place, and it's January 29, the date that you set for the meeting. What happens? Well, the people who are primarily responsible, again, you'll notice this is on each slide. It's always good to know who's primarily responsible, right? So the church visiting team, the regional church visitor, plus the 2 local contact people. The visit itself, just encourage clarifying the goal at the beginning of the church visit, because otherwise, it can be just a real, you want to create space for conversation, but otherwise it can just be a meandering conversation. So an example of a purpose of the visit could be, by the end of our time together, you will have an opportunity to understand your results of the survey, interact with the content, and develop some goals for your church. What we do encourage, and this may feel like really fast for some people, but what we really encourage them to do is identify at least one thing that they think they could do differently or try as an experiment or something, but something that they can do with the material itself. Because we're really good at just hearing things, being hearers of the survey, but not doers of the survey, so to speak. So a couple of tips for listening well, having a coaching posture. Again, this is helping people interact with themselves. So the goal isn't for them to answer the questions to you. If any of you have done, like pre-marriage or marriage counseling or something like that, your goal is to help the couple talk together. So again, they're talking as a group, and you keep kind of the focus on, hey, what are we doing? What are you seeing? And where are we moving with this? There's also a new resource that's just coming out. It's a new and an old resource. Talking pieces have been around for a long time. But it's something in PCR, Pastor Church Resources, that we're actually right now really encouraging churches to engage with. So there's a link there with just some instructions. And that this could actually be a really great space to do it, where they identify a piece and you kind of pass it around. And while you have it, you respond to the questions. And that's a way of getting everyone to be involved. And how do you embed prayer in it, opening throughout as you close, just so that we know that we're not just listening to ourselves, we're also listening to God. And then just some ideas, again, getting into practical pieces, the structure. It'll be really important to be intentional about the time and to keep it, as a church visiting team moving. And so consider a 90-minute visit as a potential. Again, this is something that depending on the church that you're visiting and the context and everything, this is just, some ideas, okay? But you might consider a 90-minute visit where 30 minutes is observing and understanding, going through the survey. 30 minutes is exploring some of the themes and values and priorities that emerge. And then you do shift and say, in the last 30 minutes, let's decide on some best next steps. Comments, questions about the visit itself?
Yeah, it's a good spot to stop, I think. Feeling overwhelmed? Excited?
Yeah, it feels a little bit like drinking from a fire hose. But one of the things, and hopefully we have the right people when you do visit the church, and I guess that's why we have our local contact is, and none of you have done this yet, but my concern is always like kind of what we're going through now. There's a lot of information that's being brought forward, and it can be sometimes overwhelming. What happens in those situations where depending on who you're engaging with, the reception isn't, it's like pulling teeth. Do you know what has that been contemplated? I mean, I don't mind talking to walls if I'm that lonely, but how does it, are there going to be, yeah, I guess that's my concern. What if we don't have a group that is intentional and wanting to gravitate to the information?
That's a great question, Mike.
Maybe I'll just make a comment about the overwhelmingness. yeah, it's a lot, like just for you guys to be listening for 90 minutes to a whole process that will take, a number of months. But maybe a way of just feeling maybe a little bit more at ease is just thinking about it step by step, so that the first part of your work would be to administer the survey. You look at that slide and it's a very doable thing, set a date and have a mechanism, bulletin announcements, whatever, to get the surveys done. Okay, that's easy enough to do. Then later on, there'll be a meeting of an assemblage of 3 people, the regional visitor and a couple other kind of helpers, I guess, which are contact people from different churches. And then you'll sit down together. So the regional church visitor, they're going to know this page, better than the contact people. And so when you meet after the survey results are done, we'll go back through this page and say, okay, what are some of the things we had to remember? And so you don't feel like all this information is something that you are personally responsible for. Really, it's the survey, getting it done, and then going to a meeting where the church visiting team reviews results, plans some questions. Just, there will be a regional church visitor who will be your guide in helping in this whole process. So, it is overwhelming, but if you break it down, that's at least one part of, I think, your question. The other question was something different. Oh, it was about pulling teeth.
One of the things I wonder, Mike, is just what we're doing right now is here's the process, and there's no expectation that any of you remember all this. That's why we're emailing it to you afterwards. We're just sort of like making sure that you're aware of it all and have a chance to interact with it. But the church visit itself, if you look at the sample structure and setting up some questions ahead of time, it should not be an information dump. It should be the survey results are pretty minimal. Like it's like, a page or two. It's very small. So it's asking them, what do you notice? Like I could sit down here with you today and say, here's some observations I have about Classis Toronto, just from conversations. Does that ring true with you, or are you noticing other things? And also it's like, hold on, let me correct what you just said, or let me fill in the gaps. And I would fully expect that people who are engaging would start telling stories even of their, like, yes, we are, we do have centrality of the word. Here's how I see it happening in our church, or no, we don't, work with young people. And here's why I think that, so I think that when people look at themselves, it gets them engaged, because we want to either affirm or correct or put nuance to the picture that's being painted.
John Myboom.
Yeah, I think I appreciate what's being said, because I think the question that Mike asked got me thinking too. I mean, so 3 people, we do a survey. 3 people who are not involved in my church are looking at that survey and trying to evaluate what the answers tell them. And then they come into our church and say, here's what we learned from the survey about your church. If it was simply that, it would strike me as being, yeah, that's not what I read, or whatever. It had better be what Al said, a conversation that says, here's what we heard, but maybe we're hearing it wrong, or maybe it's not clearly displaying what is really happening. Because it does strike me that the most important part is whether goal setting is going to be owned by the church. It's great for some church visitors to come in and say, well, we think you better set a goal to set up a youth team and have this going on and that going on, when that church may have been already for the last 5 years working on that, trying to get it going and not get. It would better be some kind of conversation about what are the holdups, what's the, what are the challenges, and how could it be. So it'd be pretty, and then some, and then a grant from Classis to help make it happen. That would probably be the end result, right?
As long as there's money, right? It'll happen. No. Maybe just another added thing, like it is kind of, here's a process to create a conversation. I think that's definitely what our hope would be, and not like, we know your church better than you, but this is what we noticed with a bit of fresh eyes.
Absolutely.
But also to not I don't want to say over promise, or almost over expect what might happen in that second step of the visit itself, or even the reflection that comes in the report. This is just the start. By the end of that visit and the report, and maybe some conversation, do you agree with what we said? You've got like survey, the actual record of the conversation, the report, and response to that. That's 4 different layers that are just kind of the start of. Then when you come back in a year or so, or then there's some history and yeah, that we won't miss, that you've been working on a youth program for 2 years or whatever. So, Richard Grift.
Yeah, I just wanted to add about this church visiting. When church visiting is at its best, it's church visitors coming alongside churches to help them, not tell them what to do. And I don't know, maybe people have had a negative experience where church visitors come in and it feels like a checkup rather than a coming alongside of. But, as we learn about church visiting, or remind ourselves, having done it before, it's about helping a church help itself. It's the local church has to take ownership of it. And then that concern about pulling teeth, my hope is that you're only there because they've invited you. And the only people, is this my understanding? The only people that are going to be doing that are the churches that are represented around this table. Because the only way you get a church visit is if you've already agreed to participate and your council said, yeah, we want to do this. Otherwise, you wouldn't be around this table today. And then because we're around this table, we're the champions in our church to encourage this to happen and, to receive that visit for our own sake. So, yeah, I'm quite hopeful. I mean, the fact that councils have sent us here means that they're indicating interest.
I took a bit from Mike's comments too, that as a kind of a corrective or a challenge, that part of the process of leading up to the visit is making sure that they have the survey results themselves, and really encourage them to spend some time themselves doing what we're going to do as a church visiting team. So they're already kind of into thinking about what they notice. And because, yeah, if we try to do it all in the hour and a half and there's no pondering beforehand, it won't be as effective. Leslie?
Well, and that's the point of having a local contact person. That's why it isn't the way that we used to do church visiting, was always people from the outside coming in and asking questions. And those questions could be well received or not well received. So really, one of the key things here is each of us as local contact people setting this up, leveraging what Richard was talking about, but also setting this up so that there is time for the council to look at things. And we're conversation discernment facilitators when we come in. Then we're not the ones that are saying, well, here's the plan, or and maybe connectors in the end as we hear things that says, oh, we're going to make, John Bowers is our catalyzer. We're going to make sure that he connects with you on this. He may have some resources for you, but we're just there to kind of help with the discernment process so that it's an honest discernment process and it doesn't necessarily fall into confirmation bias. Oh yeah, we're doing great. We don't need to do anything now. And then 3 years later, we see that this church is closing. We want to help create a good discernment conversation.
Yeah, and just before John Myboom goes, I think Leslie kind of implied that too, is that when Mike is the contact person in Georgetown, but he's also participating in the visit as part of that team at Clearview, let's say, in the Crosspoint. It's just a really neat it isn't us as church visitors arriving and telling you either. It's actually the local church is actually participating in the visiting of other churches and learning from them. And so it's that cross-pollination, which I think we won't even, we're really excited about it. So John Myboom.
I'm just, I had a thought that perhaps in the step 2, where the church visiting team, the 3 people, look at the survey results together, I wonder if bringing in the church contact person for that church into that process would already help. Just because it strikes me that if some ideas form from the three outside people and they come in with those particular prejudice ideas, I mean, I don't mean prejudice in a negative way, but they've developed their ideas already about what the survey says. It becomes potentially a battle already between, well, no, we think this is what the survey says, and we prayed over it, and so therefore this feels strong to us. And I think having some internal church involvement even in that part of the process might be a help. I don't know.
Yeah.
Cool.
Maybe to mitigate some of that concern, maybe I'll just say to all of you right now, right here, it doesn't matter what you think the survey says. I mean, you're all people who are going to go on church visits. It doesn't matter what you think. So whatever conclusions you draw up, hold them lightly. And you could do a lot worse than thinking of everything that you have to say as an I wonder, or can you tell me more about? So if you have a statement, you wonder that statement because you're not definitive. I wonder why it shows that, I wonder why this discrepancy is here. I wonder what that's saying. Can you tell me more about this? Or, so yeah, framing your own curiosity is the most important thing so that the church itself, you're facilitating an engagement that the church can have with itself and with God.
And just maybe that's super helpful, Al. And even as we prepare for visits, to remind ourselves of that, how do we have not even leading questions, but I wondering questions. One of the things Al mentioned about, which I really appreciate, is the beauty of if you come as a church, like sort of cold as a church visitor, and then the people, it's like the three of you only in the room, and you might get irritated by the visitor, or you start manifesting your irritation with fellow council members. But when the survey is there, it's like a fourth person in the room that you are sort of pointing to, that kind of a little bit away from. It gives you a bit of distance, and so that's just another neat benefit of the survey, even if it's not things that the council agrees with or whatever. It gives just a neat way to get distance.
That was all very helpful. Thank you.
Thanks, John. All right, Al.
All right. Mike, I did see you come off mute there for a second. I wonder if you were.
No, I as I was listening, it made sense. It's not ours to own. It's for the church to own. And ours is just to facilitate and ponder and maybe start poking people in that direction, sort of as an outsider looking in, right? And that's all it is, essentially. Because I actually I normally am busy on Saturday mornings with other activities, and I had to cancel those, which is totally fine. And one of my close friends said, what are you doing, right? And I was kind of like, well, this is sort of what we're doing. And he was like, oh, okay, that's pretty cool. Yeah, okay. And so, and now that's helping me to reestablish and be able to articulate a little bit more clearly what it is. Because when I said church visitation, he says, oh yeah, I remember those. And he had to kind of look up and think about how long ago it was that he had participated in one. So this is a less mechanical, I think, as you said at the beginning. So
yeah,
it's been helpful. Thank you.
Cool. And one of the beauties, just thinking about like the I wonders and tell me more about, one of the beauties of curiosity is this: by doing it with a survey, it allows a little bit more of a focused and directed curiosity. So you could go in and you could wonder how any church that you visit is doing with reaching their neighborhood. But that's you wondering it. But if the survey shows that this is a particular strong point or a particular weak point, you're like, oh, that's something that's probably worth wondering with this congregation. So it just gives a little bit of articulation to some of your wondering. Yeah. All right, this is the beyond the visit. So the visit's done, you drive away, now what? Well, one is, I think we would encourage some sort of report. I have seen in my role, classes, agendas, minutes, church visitor reports. Some of the most helpful church visitor reports combine some of the experience and really, you don't put like, we met at this date on this time necessarily and outline the whole thing, but a summary of what was discussed that you could almost think of it like this could be a bulletin announcement for the church. Hey, this church visit happened. Here's some of the stuff we discussed. You might want to list any of the goals that were generated. Like if they say, you know what we'd really like to do moving forward from here, we really want to explore what it would look like to reach out to our neighbors, maybe a community opportunity scan or something, but we want to start investigating that. That's a good goal. So just list it so that everyone in the congregation and in the classes, people know this is a goal that the church is looking at. The beauty of it is you might actually find that a bunch of your churches all have goals that are lined up together. That I've seen that in classes. And then the classes might say, wow, a bunch of our churches are all like looking toward the same thing. Maybe we should do like a classes-based workshop, or I know Classes Toronto sometimes does its learning days. If that generates out of the surveys and out of the goals that the churches themselves are setting up, what a gift to the whole classes to be able to engage in some learning and activity together. Follow-up visit. Don't underestimate the impact of the follow-up. And just church rhythm is slow, right? So 4 to 6 months can make a lot of sense. And I couldn't help but put this, shot in, the get it on the calendar shot. You can meet with them, in April and say, we'd really like April, May, June, July, August, September, October. It would be really great if we could get together in October. What date in October do you think would be best? Like, I have no idea, but we meet for council every second Tuesday. All right, well, what about the second Tuesday of October? The beauty of putting it on the calendar is you can always change it. Okay? So anyway, and it creates an accountability cycle because they're like, oh, we're actually going to come back together and talk about what we've been learning and what we've been doing with some of the goals. Who should be part of that follow-up? Ideally, it's the church visiting team and anyone who has responsibility for the goals. So you wouldn't necessarily have a follow-up with everyone that you had the original church visit with. But if something is, say, we're going to do something regarding worship. Well, if the church has a worship leader, it'd be great if that person was invited into the conversation as someone who's responsible for one of those goals with, whoever you have that meeting with. Just as a side comment on the resourcing piece, if you want to keep a conversation going, we in Healthy Church developed Healthy Church devotionals. They are designed around like a council meeting. Maybe some of you, if you've served on council, you've been around the council table and the person shows up and they're like, oh, I'm on devotions for council. We need a devotional. And they, just grab something. You could do worse than saying, hey, one of the things we're looking at is these 11 indicators. These are on the Healthy Church website. You can download them as PDFs. They're single page. They're designed to function in like a church council setting. And it's a devotional for each Healthy Church indicator, all 11. You can do it for a year, sort of a thing. Okay, so that's just an option or an idea. And then,
so Al,
yeah,
is that devotional the one developed by Stan Mast?
That is correct. Yes.
So that matches these 11 categories?
It was designed to match these 11 categories.
Cool.
Yes.
Because just started as council, and I can testify it's being very well received. And even though the council divisions or sections meet separately,
Yep.
keep a running tab of what everybody shared, and they're eager to hear, well, what did the deacons say when they talked about this devotion? And what did the pastoral elders say? And so we're really building momentum. And what's the staff saying? And so once a month, we're looking at one of each of the devotionals, knowing this process will take a year.
Love it. Rich, you just blessed me, man. Just hearing that. Because we did actually ask Stan to write those in order to provide these devotionals based on Healthy Church. So with the whole idea of creating, your church is actually really well set up to do this Healthy Church survey because you're already having conversations around these indicators. Yeah. And then your commitment, just to be clear, ideally you're available up to like a 3-year cycle. Oftentimes, church visitors are appointed on a 3-year, but if that scares you, at minimum, the expectation as a local contact person, as part of the church visiting, that you would be available up to the completion of the follow-up visit. So in terms of what are you signing up for, it's up to that 6-month or so follow-up visit. But you can stick around and do more follow-ups afterwards as well. And your commitment is throughout this whole church, or throughout this whole process, to pray for the churches that you visit. I mean, you can pray for all the churches, but in particular, if you're working with 2 churches, pray for those churches through this time. Any questions, comments there? Because that's the end of it. We do have let's look at the sample survey and just like ponder through it. But before we do that, anything about the process itself?
I have a question. Are we expecting all the churches and classes Toronto to participate, or is it totally optional for the churches?
We're hoping the churches become spiritually covetous of how it's going with the other churches, but yeah, I don't think we thought that far about mandates. We don't want any truckers driving into our classes meeting. That's a good question, though. It is a good question. We're hopeful that, in a positive way, that, people see that there's a real benefit, and certainly telling the story back at a classes meeting. They said, hey, we had a survey. It was weird, but it was kind of cool. And we talked about it, so hopefully that feedback will, and it's really, as far as my role, it's one of kind of the 5 projects we're focusing on as a classes ministry committee. So it'll stay on our table, and certainly the goal of long-term, kind of seeing where this will take us. We're hopeful. So.
All right, I'm going to share my screen one more time here. This is the trying it out. So you received a survey. I'm going to screen share it instead in just a moment. But basically, let's talk together just for a couple minutes on what do you notice? What piques your curiosity as you look at this survey? What would you hope that the church notices? And we don't need to create 4 to 5, maybe even just one. If you think of one question that, if addressed fully, could make the whole visit worthwhile. Because, sometimes there's just one question that you can talk for 90 minutes about. But, we won't put that much weight on it. Just what's a good question? And if this was your own church, what's one goal that you could see developing, or one step forward that you could see developing for your own church? So you're a local contact person. Imagine this is, you know, Willowdale's or Cross Points or First's report. What's a goal that, you know, you might see? All right. So this is the sample report that you received by email. It's actually just hosted on an online drive. So the link in the slides will take you to this as well, but you have it in email also. So this is the executive survey. And you can see on here, I'm just going to look at a couple pieces with you. Can you see it all well enough? Okay, good. Maybe I'll zoom in one more. So the executive from Sample Church. Sample Church is the name of the church. One of the things I want you to notice is this CBKELRAS. In case you're curious, that actually maps to the 11 indicators. I can't think off the top of my head really quickly what each one is, but other KE would be Kingdom Extension. Okay. So you can look at those and you can probably pretty quickly figure out which one it is. So every one of these questions maps to one of those 11 indicators. So in this case, the N is the number, because I'm pretty sure people can skip questions. Okay. So you can see 157 people, you know, responded, and the average was 4.5. So 5 is definitely true, 4 is mostly true, 3 somewhat, and then down to unsure. So you can see, just to look at this first one, our church strongly urges us to apply the Bible to every area of our lives. That would be centrality of the Bible, I think, the SCB. 59% of the respondents said this is definitely true for this church. 34 said mostly true. 6% said somewhat true, and it's very negligible for the hardly true. Okay, so you can see that's the average. Now, note that this is the perceptions of the church. So the question is, our church is like this. If we just go down, we can see perceptions of self. So again, this is where Healthy Church asks people to think about their church as a community and themselves as an individual. And you can see it's the same sort of question, but it's mapped to the individual. Every day, I earnestly think about how to apply God's word to my life. You can see how that's the personal example of our church strongly urges us to apply the Bible to every area of our lives. So do the people in the church think earnestly about how to apply God's word to their lives? Well, the average there is 3.8. Okay, so 21% of people say that's definitely true, 43 mostly true. So just as a comparative, you can see 59% of people said definitely true that our church urges us to, and 21% of the people in the church say that they themselves do this. Okay. So you can see, I won't go through every single question, but you know, it goes through, there's 11 questions, one for each of the indicators, and then 11 questions. So there's 22 questions that show up here. One for each indicator for the church, one for each indicator for the individual. Okay. And then just on the bottom, the scales, you can see perceptions of the church where the general, this is every single person who participated on a scale. So one person was here, one person was here, like this is how it sort of averages out in terms of the averages. Overall average is this 3.625. So yes, you can see each dot represents one respondent. Dots may overlap. Okay. This, I'm pretty sure, is just like an expanded repeat. So it's just a little bit more visible. And then it gets into some color of how people, you know, responded overall. Okay. And this pulls all the pieces together, all the 11 indicators together. So I'm just going to go back and I'll zoom out just a little bit more so we can see. I'm not sure if that's still visible to you, but this is a survey. I'm just curious, what do you notice?
There are some stark differences on the individual and the group. I mean, if you look at the first, I guess they don't correspond, do they? Or do they correspond? Like,
yeah, like
CB,
1 and 1,
CB.
2 and 2, 3 and 3. Yeah.
So they
So
correspond.
the first one on the group
Mhm.
is the same area as the first one on the individual.
Yeah.
Yeah.
We've got, so if you're asking the question, I look at the first on the perceptions of the church and perceptions of self. There's a stark difference between that idea of applying God's life or word to my life, right? You've got 59 in the first and 21 in the first. So that would be a question. How does that work out?
Mm-hmm.
Is that an issue in your church?
Mm-hmm. Anyone
I'm
else?
struck by, sorry.
No, go, John.
Yeah, I'm struck by, I think, is it AS or, yeah, so AS, I actively practice spiritual disciplines such as prayer, Bible reading, silence, and personal reflection. A pretty high response, but when it's asked, most people I know in this church demonstrate an authentic and growing faith by the way they live. It seems a little bit less definitive. It's almost like we wonder if other people are doing this, I guess. Possibly is.
The one that jumps out for me is the JR. Seems fairly consistent that people individually and as a church are struggling with how to respond to what's going on in the world around them.
Mm-hmm.
Hmm.
Anyone else? Something that piques your curiosity?
I think in general, any of these could be interesting conversation, tools as a congregation, just to say, so are we just being harder on ourselves or harder on people around us, or, and what would we need to change either perception of self or perception of church? Like, I think they're all generative conversation pieces.
Mm-hmm.
And it maybe even going back to Mike's comment about pulling teeth, there's definitely room for the church to consider spending a few council meetings before the church visit to ask those wondering questions, like Leslie commented. There is a lot here.
Mm-hmm. Elaine?
I think one of the things, if I was that church visitor, one thing I think I would want to know ahead of time too is what actually is the vision and mission of the local church, because that might also then indicate why the results are skewed one way or another way. Like, why do the beliefs not match the behaviors? Like, so is it because the local church spends so much time, focusing on this? And if that's what the intent of that local church is, well, then it's going to, be an indicator of how, they interpret the results or whatever. So,
mm-hmm.
And I think this is a different comment, but I think automatically I always look for the outliers. What are the outliers? And so, the dark blue, is it contrast with the whatever color, taupe, whatever color it is. So beige, brown. Yeah, and I think the outliers often, give an indication of personal practices. Like, so I don't know. I find this stuff fascinating. I do have a question though. It's a little bit different if I could. And that is, do you recommend having someone on your team that's really good at interpreting results? Because I know that's not my strength. So like when you have those two local contacts, do you recommend having someone who has like a strong math background or even a statistical background, so that because I know when we did the Reveal survey a number of years ago, where we got stuck was in the interpretation of the results. Someone who's really analytical is going to look at it one way, but someone who, doesn't have that skill set may interpret things completely differently. So any recommendations on that?
Yeah, that's a great question, Elaine. I think it's one of the reasons why there's the 3 regional church visitors that work together, so that they create a more common expectation, a common knowledge of how to engage with this particular survey. So as a church visiting team with a local contact leader, you're not just on your own, nor is the church just on its own figuring it out, but that regional church visitor really has the task of being able to interpret this data and help develop an interpretation of it.
Rich?
I'm also wondering if the interpretation concern might be alleviated if we trust the process and the Holy Spirit's guidance. I'm personally less concerned about worrying if we got it right, as much as the fact that we're being intentional about going through the process. And by seeking the Spirit's leading and the discernment of the group that you're a part of and the leadership you're a part of, we can trust, I think, that God's going to lead us into something good, trusting his providence. I get what Elaine is saying. I want the answer. That would be really nice. Thus says the Lord. But and maybe what you're all saying is all playing a part. But I'm hopeful that by being intentional about the process, we're actually, we're giving space for the Holy Spirit to lead us.
One of the things that, and this maybe comes back to the goal piece of the visit. One of the things that we talked about as a smaller group as we prepared for today was, is it reasonable to expect a church leadership to develop a goal out of this in a 90-minute church visit? And on one hand, the answer is no, that's not reasonable at all. Because, how do you make sure you've got the right goal and you're committing to something that's robust and it's like the right thing? The other part of it is, yeah, it is possible when you think of the goal as what is perhaps the next right thing for us to try. So just holding not just the data, but also saying, what do we do with this? And holding that lightly and holding it sort of like, what might God be nudging us toward? Can just be a helpful way to engage in it. And then if a church wants to get really deep into it, the full survey could be actually much more robust and effective for naming some very specific goals. Anyone else wonder anything when they look at this survey, or something you might hope the church notices? I'll offer a wonder. I'm looking at SL. Our leaders, including volunteer leaders, inspire us to grow spiritually, which ranks pretty high. But the SL on the individual, I speak regularly with others about their spiritual life. there's a lot more of a maybe and no. It seems like one of the biggest discrepancies, not the only one, but a big discrepancy here between individuals saying this is a practice I'm engaging in, growing spiritually as a community, versus what they think of the church as offering and doing. And it just makes me wonder what opportunities exist in the church for people to speak about their faith, or what encouragement actually is being given.
I have one other question.
Yeah, please.
And it leads into more, I would call it church trends. And so the question actually is, from the survey, do we know the age demographic of those who are answering? Like, what percentage are millennials? What percentage are Gen Zs? What percentage are boomers, and so on? Is that indicated anywhere?
On this report, I have no, but I'm pretty confident that's captured. That might be one of those when it's like the full survey.
Okay.
It asks that information. Again, the executive survey is meant to sort of be quick and dirty, right?
Sure.
So,
which has huge value, don't get me wrong.
Yeah.
I think that's something that I would also really love to know, because I think, knowing even church trends and stuff, I mean, a Gen Z is going to answer a question very differently than someone who is a boomer. So, I was just curious. Thank you. Thanks for that.
Well, and that's something I'll look into, because I want to make sure that maybe this is an incomplete sample report that could easily, I mean, if they capture the data anyway, it could easily just be reported back. But yeah, again, there's a much bigger report, because how do you parse it out by age? It turns into a much bigger report as well. But it could be one of those things that, especially since you're astute and curious to that, it could be, hey, it seems like a lot of people say this. Do you sense in your church? Like, I wonder, is this a common thing within your church that everyone thinks this way? Or do you notice generationally different people responding differently?
I'll be honest, the reason that I'm asking the question is because if it's predominantly those who are 60 and above who are answering the survey, and we're going to be making strategic decisions about, what to do moving forward, I think that could be dangerous, right? So we want to make sure that it's a full sample size. Now, is it possible to add those questions ahead of time, or tweak it in such a way that we do that? Because I actually really like the shortness of the survey.
Yeah.
But like, I realize it goes to Calvin, and there's a whole team that is analyzing the results and puts the report together, which is awesome. But is there a way to even add that?
Yeah.
I'm wondering how, there is a certain cost for the survey that I guess probably this round will be covered by classes, but would it really require another bill if we let churches do 3 surveys with different web addresses? So, to the Gen Z Xers or whatever letters, but in the boomers, it kind of have 3 different groups of results, because I think you will see different trends that way. But if it's simply adding an age, that could be another way to parse it up. Because if you just, if you get, all you get is like a bell curve of participation, of the different ages, so many of this age, and that it still won't parse apart what the younger folks were thinking, and what seniors and what boomers were thinking. So
I know it's all possible, and it could be one of those things where they're like, if you just tell us include age demographic, we just say include age demographic and hit export, right? So let me look into it, and I'll make sure that we know what is possible within the executive survey in a way that's manageable and what's not.
It kind of comes back to John Myboom's earliest question around the unique kind of, I don't want to say bifurcation, but the sort of the two congregations in one, the ethnic distinctions or new Canadian distinctions would, if it gets dumped into one congregation, you won't maybe see that there's a divergence of values or, what they think, what different people think are more important. But, so.
Yeah, I'm thinking out loud here with you a little bit. One of the benefits of parsing it out and seeing where different people land, to me, is probably mostly about seeing the participation level. Because if you have a church of, say, 200 people, and you send it out to all 200 and you get 35 participants, you might wonder, well, who are these 35 participants, right? But if let's just say that you get the survey results and they all, 200 people, it goes out to 200 people and 200 people fill it out, then even without having the chance to parse out the age or ethnicity or other demographics, it still does give you a sense for church leadership to say, this is the general impression, irrespective of the way it parses out. People in general experience our church community this way, and people in our church community in general experience themselves in these ways. And that can be really helpful for thinking about what does it mean for the whole church to move forward in certain directions.
I think so. Just kind of tracking the time a little bit and thinking a little bit about, I don't know, we really didn't have a slide, kind of what's next as far as what we want to see happen. I guess probably we could summarize some of that in an email. But yeah,
I think we have to set a date.
We need to set a date. I heard that somewhere.
Yeah.
I don't know what that means, but I think we need to set a date. Yeah, so the setting a date part will be in part from each of your churches saying, we're ready to start the survey, or you saying, hey, I'll lead the survey in March or whatever. That would be certainly one step forward. And then also a date for when we could, kind of come for a visit and, leaving lots of time in there if the local church wants to maybe kind of reflect on the results even before the visit. So that's a bit vague, but definitely we need to set a date according to Mike.
It might also be helpful for people to know kind of who's on whose team, like who's working together, just to make sure that that's clear.
Right. Yeah, we'll put that on an email as well. But we're thinking of the region, since there's no southern region in the middle of Lake Ontario, we have an east and a west and a north. And so that's what those list of churches are. I don't 100% remember, but you've got Cochrane and Aurelia, the two Barrie churches. I think Richmond Hill, Newmarket, Holland-Marsh probably are north. And then
We also put Woodbridge in there.
did I? Okay.
I'm not sure if Woodbridge belongs there, but
It could be just maybe splitting the numbers up a little bit evenly, but so then
Cochrane.
Well, Cochrane probably won't be having a church visit per se,
Okay.
but I'm just saying it is still an existing congregation. So,
Okay.
but we are in regular contact with Cochrane, so don't be worried about that.
And just for information's sake, I'm working with First Barrie and with Heritage.
Right, and
So
I'll be
we're
working
kind of a
with
team.
Georgetown and with Clearview, and then Moses, Willowdale, and
Crosspoint.
Crosspoint. Yeah.
Well, I'll just, and I know John kind of mentioned this at the beginning, but this is a new thing for Classis Toronto. And so you can see we put a lot of energy and work into trying making it as clear a process as possible. But there's going to be moments, especially from this point forward, where you're like, oh, what am I supposed to do next? So we just ask that you all extend grace, but don't ever hesitate to ask the question. And if you don't understand what's going on, someone else probably doesn't understand what's going on. And it might be a communication thing that, you know, your church visiting leaders need to attend to. And we take no harm, no foul. Please, by all means, let us know.
Cool. So expect an email. Oh, thanks, Dan. Cool.
Any other questions or comments at this point? Recognizing, you know, don't hesitate after this either.